The pint came down over Corwin's head in one long amber spill, and for half a second the whole night went silent except for the sound of it splashing off the brim of his bearskin and running down the back of his collar. I was 8 feet to his left, standing my own post at the north pillar of the King's Gate, and I watched the beer sheet down his face in the lamplight, while the man who poured it threw both arms in the air like he had just won something. Behind him, a half-dozen others in matching paper crowns roared. I have stood that gate through wind that knocked the helmets off tourists and rain that turned the cobbles to glass, and I had never once seen a man do what that fellow did: pour a full glass over the guard, on a dare, at midnight, and laugh. Corwin did not move. That is the part nobody who was there will ever forget. The beer was still dripping off his chin, soaking into the red wool of his tunic, pooling in the hollow of his collarbone where the chin strap pressed, and he stood as if the world had not touched him at all. Eyes forward, rifle at the carry, the plume of his breath rising slow and even into the cold. My name is Sergeant Vance Holloway, and I have served the King's Gate 11 years. Corwin had served it 4. He was the youngest man on our night watch, and, I will say it plainly, the best of us at the one thing the post demands, the gift of being a statue when the whole world wants you to be a man. That night I learned exactly how much that gift can cost, and exactly what it is worth. Let me take you back to the start of it, because the beer was not the start. The beer was the middle. The night watch at the King's Gate is a different animal from the day. By daylight the forecourt is a river of tourists, families with cameras, schoolchildren counting our buttons, and the provocations are mostly small and harmless: a teenager pulling a face, a man waving his hat to see if we'll blink. By night the crowds thin to almost nothing. The great iron gates are shut and locked. 2 of us stand the outer pillars under the gas-style lamps the household keeps for the look of the thing, and the silence settles so deep you can hear the river 2 streets over. It is a post for steady men. Nothing usually happens. That is the point of it. So when the noise started coming up the avenue around 11:30, I marked it the way you mark weather. A group. Loud. Men's voices. The particular bray of men who have been drinking since the afternoon and have decided the night belongs to them. I counted them as they came under the first lamp: 7, maybe 8, all dressed alike in dark suits gone rumpled, all wearing those cheap gold paper crowns you buy by the dozen, and one of them with a sash across his chest that read something I could not make out at that distance but did not need to. I had seen enough of them over the years. A stag party. The last night of a bachelor's freedom, and his friends had taken charge of ruining it for him in the traditional way. They were not at first our problem. The pavement is public. A man may walk it drunk and singing if he keeps his hands to himself and does not climb the railings. I have learned to let a great deal wash past me. The post teaches you that the world is full of noise that means nothing, and your job is to stand inside it like a stone in a stream. But this group did not wash past. They slowed as they reached the gate, the way a tide pools against a wall, and they turned their faces toward us, and I felt the night change its weather. "Look at them," one of them said, loud enough to carry. "Look at these 2. They're not even real, mate. They're like the wax ones. Watch this." He stepped up close to Corwin, closer than the public is ever supposed to come, right into the space where the lamp throws your shadow against the man, and he waved a flat hand in front of Corwin's eyes, slow, back and forth, the way you'd test whether someone was asleep with their eyes open. Corwin did not so much as flick a lash. The man laughed and looked back at his friends for the reward of it. "Told you, Wax." I want to be fair to them, because the truth is harder and more useful than a story where they were monsters. They were not monsters. They were ordinary men, the kind you'd find pleasant enough on any other day, made stupid by drink and by each other. That is the thing about a crowd of friends with a skinful in them. Each one is braver and crueler than he would ever be alone, because each is performing for the others and the performance feeds on itself. One man waves his hand. It gets a laugh. The next man has to do something bigger to get the same laugh, and so it climbs. The one who seemed to be running things broad, red-faced, the loudest, the one I came to think of as the ringleader clapped his hands together. Right, forfeit time, Danny. He grabbed the shoulder of a thinner man who hung at the back of the group, the only one not laughing, and I understood at once that Danny was the groom, the man whose Stag-Night this was, the one being marched through his own humiliation. Danny, the dare. You said you'd do anything. Anything, you said, so here it is. You're going to make one of them move. Danny's face, even from where I stood, was the face of a man who wanted to be home. Come on, he said. Leave it. They're just doing their job. You said anything. Not this. They're soldiers, Pete. They're statues, said the ringleader, Pete, and the word landed in me like a small cold stone because I have heard it 1,000 times and it never stops being wrong. They stand there and take it. That's the whole game, that's why it's funny. Watch. And he turned and looked, not at Danny but at Corwin, and something in his face decided to go further than a waving hand. I have replayed the next part many times. I have asked myself whether I should have stepped from my post and put myself between them. The honest answer is that I could not have reached them in time, and that the post holds you even when every nerve is screaming to leave it. That is what the post is. So I did what we are trained to do. I marked the man's face. I marked the time on the gate clock, 11:41, and I held. Pete took a fresh pint from one of the others. They had carried open glasses up the avenue, which is its own small lawlessness, and he held it up to the lamplight like a toast. To the wax man, he said, and he stepped in and he poured it over Corwin's head. And Corwin did not move. You have to understand what that took, because the listener at home, hearing it, thinks, well, it's only beer, it's not a knife. What's the great trial in standing still under a splash of beer? Let me tell you what it is. It is cold going down inside your collar in the dead of a winter night, soaking the wool that will not dry for hours, so that you stand the rest of your watch chilled to the spine. It is the indignity of it, performed for an audience, recorded, because 3 of them had their phones up. I saw the little rectangles of light, to be laughed at by strangers who will never know your name. It is your body flooding with the oldest instinct a man has, the one that says strike back, defend yourself, do not let this stand. And it is the discipline, drilled into you over years until it is more reliable than instinct, that closes a hand over that fire and holds it down. Holds it down. Holds it down. Corwin held it down. The beer ran off him, and he stood in his ruined tunic with his eyes forward, and his face as still as the stone pillar at his back, and the stag party howled. He didn't move, he didn't even look at him, he's actually wax. That should have been the end of it. A drunk's prank, a soaked guardsman, a story they'd tell badly for years. If they had walked on then, I'd have logged it and we'd have got Corwin a dry tunic, and that would have been the whole of it. But the laughter is a hunger, and a hunger is never finished by one bite. Do the other one, somebody shouted. Do both of them. And Pete's red face swung toward me. I am not Corwin. I want to be clear about that. I have 11 years on the gate and I have built my stillness like a wall, brick by brick. But I am a sergeant, and I had a second man under my watch standing soaked and silent at the north pillar. And the thing rising in me as Pete came toward me was not fear, and it was not the urge to strike. It was a colder thing. It was the awareness, very precise, that this had stopped being a prank the moment the beer left the glass, and that the next thing these men did would decide the rest of their night and quite possibly the rest of their year. Because here is what the laughing men did not know, what almost nobody on the public side of the railings knows. The thing they take for a wax man's helplessness is not helplessness. We do not stand there because we are forbidden to act. We stand there because acting is a weapon we are trusted not to draw unless we must, and the trust runs in both directions. The law does not see the splash of beer the way the stag party saw it. The law has a word for a man laying hands or fluids on another man without his leave, and the word is not prank. But Pete did not know that, and he came at me with the empty glass turned upside down in his fist, grinning, reaching out to flick the brim of my bearskin with his other hand. And behind him the groom, Danny, finally moved. Danny caught Pete's arm. "That's enough, Pete, stop it." "Stop?" His voice cracked on the second stop. And for a moment the whole group teetered, because a stag party only works while everyone agrees to keep playing, and the groom had just refused. Pete shook him off, annoyed. "Don't be a wet blanket, it's your night." But the spell had shifted. The men behind had gone a little quieter. 2 of them had lowered their phones. The hunger was still there, but it had eaten enough, and the part of a drunk man that knows, somewhere far down, that he has crossed a line was beginning to surface. I made a decision then. I had been turning it over since the beer left the glass, and now I made it, and I want to explain why, because it is the heart of everything that came after. A man on the gate may speak. People think we are forbidden to. We are not. We are trained to silence because silence is the discipline and the dignity of the post, and because 99 provocations in 100 dissolve faster if you give them nothing to push against. But there is 100th, and on the 100th the post permits requires a guardsman to issue a clear level command. Not a shout, not an argument, a command. Because once a thing has crossed from nuisance into assault, our duty is no longer to absorb it. Our duty is to control it. The beer over Corwin had crossed that line. I had let it stand for him because he had chosen to let it stand, and that was his to choose, and I will tell you later why he chose it. But I would not let it climb a second rung. Not on my watch. Not with a man reaching for my second guardsman. So I came off the still. I did it the way we are taught, one crisp motion. No drama. The rifle coming to the present arms position with a snap that cut the night. My heels coming together with a crack on the cobbles that I promise you sounded, in that silence, like a gunshot. Step back from the gate. I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. There is a register a trained man can find, flat, absolute carrying, that goes through a crowd of drunks like cold water down the spine. Pete froze with his hand still half lifted toward my bearskin. The grin was still on his face, but it had no idea what to do with itself anymore. "You are interfering with guardsmen on royal duty," I said, every word laid down separate and hard. "You have assaulted one of them. You will step back from the gate, and you will stay where you are." For one breath nobody did anything. Then somewhere in the back of the group a younger man, barely more than a boy himself, one of the quiet ones, said, in a voice gone suddenly sober, "Lads, lads, the camera," and he pointed up. I had not needed to point it out, but he had done me a service by saying it aloud, because their heads all turned and followed his finger to the dome of dark glass set under the arch of the gate, where the household's camera had been watching the whole avenue the entire time. It does not blink. It does not miss. It had recorded the hand waved in Corwin's face, the toast, the beer coming down, every drop of it in clean infrared with the time burned into the corner of the frame. And in the same instant they understood the camera, they understood the phones in their own hands, that they themselves had filmed it, laughing, and that those films existed now and could not be unmade. You could watch the night sober them. It went through the group like a draft through a house. The paper crowns suddenly looked very stupid on their heads. Pete lowered his hand. "It was a joke," he said. The voice was different now, smaller. "It was just a laugh, all right. No harm done. We'll go. Come on, lads." "You will stay where you are," I said. Because I had already heard it, the thing they had not. Under the avenue noise, behind me and to the side, the measured double time of boots. When I had come off the still and snapped to present arms, the motion had done more than stop Pete. It had tripped the post. The camera under the arch feeds a guardroom just inside the wall, and the sergeant of the guardroom watch, a hard, fair man named Eckhart who had 30 years in and a memory like a ledger, had been watching his monitor since the group first slowed at the gate. The present arms from a sentry at midnight is not a thing that happens. It is, in our world, an alarm. Eckhart had already turned out the relief. They came through the wicket in the great gate in a column, 6 of them the night relief section, and they did not run because we do not run, But they came at the pace that eats ground, and the sound of them arriving boots, the creak of leather, the small metallic music of equipment, did to the stag party what nothing I had said could do. It made the thing real. "Stand fast," Eckhart said, coming through last, and the two words settled over the forecourt like a lid. He was not a large man, but he carried the gait in his bearing. He took in the scene in one slow sweep. Corwin soaked to the collar and still at his pillar, me at present arms, the empty pint glass in Pete's hand, the puddle of beer shining black on the cobbles, the 8 men in their crowns. He did not raise his voice either. He never did. "Sergeant Holloway, report." I gave it to him in the clipped shorthand of the post, eyes still forward, because Pete and his friends were still in front of me and I was still on duty. "Group of 8 approached the gate at 11:31, sir. Verbal at first. At 11:41 the man with the glass, that one. I did not point. You do not point. I marked him with my voice, poured a full pint over Guardsman Corwin's head in person. Deliberate. On a stated dare. Guardsman Corwin held his post throughout. The same man then advanced on my position. I came to present arms and ordered them to stand. "Anyone touch you, Sergeant?" He reached for the bearskin. "Did not make contact, sir." "And Corwin?" "Drench, sir." "Beer to the skin, holding." Eckhart was quiet for a moment, and I have served under enough men to know what that quiet was. It was a man deciding, very deliberately, not to be angry, because anger is a gift you hand to the people who provoked you, and Eckhart had given that gift to no one in 30 years. "Right," he said. He turned to the group and he spoke to all of them as one. "You are detained at a royal gate while the constabulary are summoned. That has already been done. You will not leave. If you attempt to leave, you will be detained physically, and that will become a separate matter, and you do not want a separate matter. Do you understand me?" It is a strange thing to watch grown men, men who run businesses and drive cars and have wives waiting at home, turn into chastened boys. But that is what fear and shame do to drink. The crowns came off now, one by one, stuffed into pockets as if hiding the evidence of the costume would hide the crime. 2 of them sat down on the cold cobbles without being told to, simply because their legs had decided for them. Pete stood swaying, the empty glass still in his fist as if he had forgotten it was there, and the bravado was draining out of his red face, and leaving something underneath that I had seen before in men at the gate. The dawning, sick comprehension of a person who has just realized that the thing he did for a laugh is going to cost more than he has. Only Danny, the groom, stood apart, and he was not afraid. He was something worse. He was ashamed all the way through, the kind of shame that does not perform and does not bargain, and he was looking at Corwin. "I'm sorry," Danny said. He said it to Corwin directly, stepping toward him, and a guardsman from the relief moved to put a hand up, but Eckhart said, "Let him," and Danny came to within a pace of the soaked young man at the north pillar. "I'm so sorry. This wasn't, I didn't want any of this. They get like this and you can't. I should have stopped them at the first pub. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." Corwin did not answer him, of course. Corwin was on duty and at his post and would not so much as turn his eyes, and the beer was still in his eyelashes. But I was close enough to see what the listener at home cannot, and I will tell you what I saw. I saw Corwin's jaw, which had been set like iron through the whole of it, ease just slightly, just at the hinge, the way a man's face changes when he has decided something. He did not look at Danny, but he heard him. And whatever Corwin had been carrying through that long, terrible minute of standing still, the apology from the one man in the group who had tried to stop it, eased a fraction of the weight. That is a thing I have learned on the gate. The provocation never moves us. But sometimes, rarely, a small true thing from a stranger does, not enough to break the post, never that, but enough to remind you that the wall of discipline you have built is protecting something that is still alive inside. The constabulary arrived 11 minutes later. 2 cars, no sirens. The household does not permit sirens at the gate after dark, and 4 officers who knew Eckhart by name, because they had stood beside our gate on 100 quiet nights and a few loud ones. The senior of them, a steady woman with gray at her temples whom I will call Inspector Rourke, took one look at the puddle and the soaked guardsmen and the men in their crumpled suits, and she did not need the story told twice. Who poured it? 8 men, and not one of them spoke, and the silence itself was an answer, because in a group that has been laughing together the guilty man is always the one the others cannot quite look at. Rourke followed their not looking straight to Pete. You. Pete tried one last time the only card a certain kind of man ever holds. Look, officer, this is ridiculous. It's beer. We're celebrating. It's his stag. He waved at Danny. We didn't hurt anyone. He's a guard. It's literally his job to stand there. No harm done. Surely we can just sort this out. I've got, look, whatever the fine is, and his hand went to his jacket, toward the inside pocket, toward his wallet, and I watched Inspector Rourke's expression close like a door. Sir, take your hand away from your pocket. I was only going to. I know exactly what you were going to do. She let that sit. You poured a pint of beer over the head of a man standing a royal post. That is an assault. It is on the gate camera. It is on at least 3 of your friends' telephones, and you have just, in front of 4 police officers, offered me money. Hand by your side, please. The beer over Corwin had been the moment the night turned. But it was that gesture toward the wallet, the assumption, bone deep in a certain kind of man, that there is no wall money cannot buy a door through, that I think sealed it. Because Rourke was the second immovable thing Pete had met that night, and like the first one, she would not be moved, and you could see the exact instant he understood that the rules he had lived his whole comfortable life by did not run here. They took the phones first. With consent freely given by men too frightened to refuse, the films copied as evidence. They took Pete's name and Danny's name and the names of all the rest. And then they put Pete in handcuffs. Gently, properly, the caution read out clear in the lamplight, and the broad red-faced man who had toasted, the wax man, 40 minutes before stood in irons on the cobbles he had thought belonged to him, and one of his crowns stuffed back in his own pocket fell out and lay in the puddle of his own pint, slowly going to mush. I should tell you about Corwin's relief because it matters. Eckhart did not order Corwin off his post the moment the constabulary arrived. He let him stand. I understood it, and I think Corwin understood it. To pull him off the instant a stranger apologized would have said the prank had won, had broken the post, had moved the unmovable. So Corwin stood his full position, soaked and shivering and steady, until Eckhart was good and ready. And only then, only when the household's own rhythm called for it, not the stag parties, did Eckhart give the quiet word, and the relief stepped up, and Corwin executed the change of sentries flawlessly, every motion clean, and marched off the gate exactly as he would have on any night, with the beer still glittering on his collar in the lamplight. He had not been driven off. He had finished his watch. There is a world of difference, and every man in that forecourt felt it. It was only when he passed me, on his way through the wicket, that he was close enough for me to murmur the one thing a man can say to another in that moment without breaking anything. Well held, Corwin. He did not break stride, but I heard him answer, low, 2 words, and they have stayed with me. Held fine. Inside the guardroom there was a dry tunic and hot tea, and the particular gruff warmth that hard men show each other when no one outside can see it. Eckhart himself brought Corwin the tea, which I had never once known him to do for anyone, and he put a hand on the young man's shoulder for exactly 1 second and said, "Best stillness I've watched on that gate in 30 years." And then he took his hand away and became the sergeant again, because a compliment held 1 second too long stops being a compliment and becomes pity, and Corwin did not need pity. We logged it. Time of approach, time of the assault, the relief turnout, the constabulary, the arrest. I wrote the report in my own hand because the night was mine, and I wrote it plainly, because the plain account was damning enough and needed no help from me. I want to read you the last line of what I wrote, because I weighed it carefully and I have never regretted a word. Throughout, Guardsman Corwin's conduct was exemplary in every particular. He absorbed a deliberate assault without breach of bearing and resumed his duties without complaint. The discipline of the post was upheld. That was the household's view of it, and the household's view did not change. But the wider world's view, that is the part of this story I did not see coming, and the part I think matters most. Because the films existed. The stag party's own phones had captured it all, and before the constabulary thought to ask for the footage, one of those films had already left the avenue. The young one, the boy who had said the camera, he had been filming at the start, the way they all had, expecting a funny clip of a wax man getting a beer bath. But somewhere in the recording, the thing he had aimed to capture turned into something else entirely, and even drunk, even ashamed, he must have felt it, because the clip he had quietly sent to one friend before the police arrived was not the clip he had set out to make. I have watched it since. The whole world has watched it since. It runs 41 seconds. It opens on the laughter and the crowns and the dare, and you brace yourself to dislike the guard, the way you're trained by 1,000 prank videos to expect the still man to be the joke. And then the pint comes down. And then the camera, shaking with the holder's own laughter, slowly stops shaking, because the laughter is dying in his throat, because Corwin is not flinching, because the beer is running off a young man's face, and that young man is not a wax figure and not a joke. He is a soldier holding a line that the men in front of him cannot even see, and the longer he holds it, the more enormous his stillness becomes. Until by the end of the 41 seconds, the only person in the frame who looks ridiculous is the man with the empty glass. That is what went out into the world, not a humiliated guard, a humiliated stag party filmed by their own hands in front of a young man whose dignity grew with every second they tried to take it from him. It traveled the way these things travel now, faster than any of us could follow. By the next afternoon it had been watched more times than there are people in the kingdom, and the comment that rose to the top of every version of it, the thing strangers said to one another over and over, was some form of the same observation. He didn't move. Look at him. He didn't move. The very thing Pete had counted on for his joke, that the guard would stand and take it, was the thing that destroyed Pete and exalted Corwin, because a watching world does not laugh at a man who will not be moved. A watching world goes quiet in front of him. It always has. That is the oldest thing the gate knows. Now here is the part I promised to tell you, why Corwin held when the beer came down. Why he did not flinch, when flinching would have been so human, so forgivable, so easy. I asked him myself days later, when the storm of it had cooled and we were off watch, and a man can ask another man a true question. I expected him to say it was training, or duty, or the post. He said all of those things, but they were not the real answer, and after a while he gave me the real one. Corwin's father had stood the same gate. 30 years before, a younger version of the same kind of crowd had done a smaller version of the same thing, not a pint, but a shove. A hand laid on the old man to see if he'd swing, and Corwin's father had not swung, had held his post exactly as his son did, and had come home that night and told the story not as a humiliation but as the proudest night of his service. Anybody can hit back, the old man used to tell the boy. It takes nothing. It takes a child. The hard thing, the thing they pay you in honor for, because they can't pay you in anything else, is to stand still while a fool empties his cup on you, and let the standing still be the answer. Because the man who pours the cup is telling the whole street who he is. And the man who stands there soaked and does not move, he's telling them who he is too. You let those two men stand side by side. You don't have to say a word. The street will know. The old man had died 2 winters back, and when the pint came down over his son's head at the North Pillar, Corwin told me, he had not thought about the law or the camera or the consequence. He had thought about his father. He had stood still for his father, and for the gate his father had stood, and for the simple proposition his father had spent a life proving, that the man who can be provoked is owned by whoever provokes him, and the man who cannot be provoked owns himself, and that this, and not the rifle and not the uniform, is what the post truly guards. I just had to be what he was, Corwin said. For 40 seconds, that's all it was. 40 seconds of being my dad. The rest of it, the camera, the arrest, all the rest, that was never my job. My job was the 40 seconds. And then he gave me a small, tired, entirely unwax-like smile and said, "The tunic's never coming clean, though. You can still smell it if you get close." The consequences came in their own time, and they came in full. And I will tell you them plainly because a story like this owes the listener the ending the beginning promised. Pete, the ringleader, the man who poured the pint, was charged, and when his day came, he did not fight it, because there was nothing to fight. The gate camera does not lie, and his own friends' phones had buried him. He stood before the bench much as he had stood on the cobbles, smaller than he thought he was, and he was convicted of the assault and bound over and made to pay, and the sum he paid was the kind that a comfortable man feels for a long time, the kind that turns up in a conversation with his wife that he does not enjoy. But the money, I think, was the least of it by far. Because the film had done its work. By the time Pete stood before the bench, half the kingdom knew his face, and the thing they knew it for was the worst thing a certain kind of proud man can be known for, not as a danger, not as a hard man, but as a fool. As the red-faced clown in a paper crown who poured a drink over a soldier's head and got himself arrested for it, immortalized on a loop, forever, his cruelty curdling on camera into his own ridiculousness. He had set out to make a guard look like a joke. He had succeeded only in making himself one, and unlike a beer-soaked tunic, that does not wash out. His name went around his own world, the people he did business with, the club he belonged to, the men he played golf with on Saturdays who used to laugh at his jokes. I am told, by one of the constables who kept loose track of it the way they do, that doors that had always opened for Pete began, quietly, to be a little harder to open. Nobody made a speech. Nobody had to. The street knew, exactly as Corwin's father had said the street would know. You let the two men stand side by side, the one who poured the cup and the one who stood soaked and unmoved, and you did not have to say a single word. The whole watching world looked at the pair of them and decided, all on its own, which one was the man. As for the others, the friends who had laughed and filmed and chanted, "Do the other one," they were not charged, because the law is careful and the camera was clear about whose hand held the glass. But they did not get away clean, and I am glad of it, because a man who stands in a circle and laughs another man into cruelty is not innocent, whatever the law can prove. Their own faces were in the films too, crowns and all, howling. They had to go home to wives and mothers and explain why they were the laughing men in the clip the whole country was sharing. There is a punishment in that no court hands down and no court needs to. And Danny, the groom, the one man among them who had said stop, Danny did a thing I did not expect, and it is the reason I will always hold his name apart from the others. A week after the wedding he was supposed to be celebrating, he came back to the gate. In daylight, sober, alone, in a plain coat, and he asked the duty sergeant if he might leave something. He was not allowed past the railings, of course, and he did not try. He left a letter, addressed in careful hand to the guardsman who stood the north pillar, and a single thing wrapped in paper. Eckhart brought it to Corwin. The letter Corwin let me read. It said, in short, that Danny was ashamed, that the shame had not faded and he did not want it to, that he had spent his whole life going along with louder men, and that watching Corwin refuse to be moved had shown him, at 34 years old, the difference between a man who stands for something and a man who merely stands near the men who shout. He wrote that he had not slept the night of his stag for thinking about it, and that he had made one decision because of it, that he was done being the quiet man at the back of the cruel man's joke. "You didn't move," Danny wrote, "and somehow that moved me more than anything has in years. I don't expect you to forgive it. I just needed you to know that one person in that group has been changed by what you did, and that the change is going to last." The thing wrapped in paper was a small, plain, brand-new tin of the polish we use on the brass of our buttons. It was the only gift a stranger could think to give a guardsman that a guardsman could actually use and would not be obliged to refuse. And it told me that Danny had thought hard about it, that he had asked himself what you give a man like that, and had landed on the one humble, useful, exactly right thing. Corwin kept it. He used it. I have seen him use it. There is a quiet justice in that too, that the brass on the king's gate is shined, some nights, with the apology of a man who learned, on the worst night of his friend's stupidity, what a guard's stillness actually means. Corwin went back to the gate, of course. The next night and every night after, the same north pillar, the same stillness, as if none of it had happened, because that is the final discipline, the one nobody films, the one no clip ever captures. You take the worst the world can pour over you, and the next night you stand the post again, unchanged and unbroken, and you let your steadiness be the only answer the world ever gets. I stood beside him that next night. It was quiet, the way the gate is usually quiet, the river murmuring 2 streets over, the lamps throwing their small warm pools on the cobbles. Around midnight a few people came up the avenue, not drunks, just late walkers, and they slowed at the railings the way people do, and I tensed the way I always will now, and I watched their faces. But they were not there to test us. One of them, an older man, stopped a respectful distance back, and he looked at Corwin for a long moment, and then he did something I have seen more and more in the weeks since the film went out. He took off his hat. Just that. He stood bareheaded in the cold in front of a young guardsman he had never met, in honor of a thing he had seen done, and then he put his hat back on and walked quietly away into the dark. Corwin did not move. He never does. But I was close enough again to see the thing the camera never catches, the small ease at the hinge of the jaw, the breath let out slow into the cold, and I knew that he had seen the man and the hat and understood it. People ask me, when they hear I was there, what the lesson of it is. They want it neat. They want me to say that the bad man got what he deserved, and he did, and that the good man was rewarded, and in the way that matters he was. But that is not the lesson. The lesson is the thing Corwin's father spent 30 years standing on that same cold stone to prove, and the thing his son proved again in 40 seconds under a falling pint, and it is this: a man is not what is done to him. A man is what he does about it. The fool with the glass thought the power in that forecourt was his, because he was loud and they were many and the young soldier was still. He was exactly wrong. The power was in the stillness. It was always in the stillness. The loudest man on the avenue was the most owned by his own drink and his own friends and his own need to be laughed at, and the quietest man at the pillar, soaked to the skin and forbidden to move, was the only truly free man on the whole of that cold street. The pint was poured to ruin a guardsman's night. It ruined the wrong man's, and not just his night. His name, his standing, the comfortable certainty that the rules bend for the loud and the moneyed. All of it gone on a loop, 41 seconds long, for as long as the kingdom cares to watch. And the guardsman it was meant to break. He shined his buttons with a stranger's apology, and he stood his post, and he is standing it tonight. Eyes forward, rifle at the carry. The plume of his breath rising slow and even into the cold, exactly as it did before any of it, exactly as his fathers did before him. He never moved. That was the whole of it. He never moved, and that is precisely why nobody who saw it will ever forget him.